Alright, I'll get started. Today I'm going to talk about getting started in open source. I have a feeling now I know who is at this conference that this talk may be pitched a little low. So could I get a hand up if you have already contributed code to an open source project? Alright, now the people who never have.
Well, probably me.
Alright, cool. So I'm probably talking to the four of you, and what I would like is that other people who are really experienced at contributing to open source should chime in with their advice as I go along. It's a relatively short presentation, but I welcome audience questions, but also comments, which can be obnoxious in some contexts, but this time around I actually welcome them. So, let's get going. You all met me yesterday. I'm Thomson, I work for Mozilla. I'll tell you a little bit about my background in open source. I got started in the open source universe, actually with PHP, back in like the mid to late 90s. And I want to tell you a little story because it's kind of interesting. I have never contributed code to PHP, but I have contributed. I spent a lot of time answering questions on mailing lists. I wrote a book and things like that. So one thing I want to point out is that those things are actually contributions. It sounds defensive, but I think sort of in the context of, say, Mozilla, we have a lot of contributors, and a lot of them never write code. Like, they're people who localize Firefox. Like, they don't have any technical skills at all, but they know how to speak Romanian. Or they write documentation. Filing a bug is a really valuable contribution, especially if you have steps to reproduce. Test case is better, but if you're not technical enough, if you can tell us how you did it in a way that's reproducible, that's really useful. So I just kind of want to talk about all these different things, and how and why you might get started contributing. Okay, so the reasons for contributing to open source are many and varied, and the traditional reason is scratch your own itch, right? This is where you go to somebody in an open source project and say, I hate that it does this. Why does Firefox do this? It really sucks that it does that. And the traditional response is patches welcome. Or there's a more modern t-shirt one of my co-workers has, Tofu Matt, for those who know him. It says PR or double bar STFU. Wow. You know, that's kind of rude, to be honest with you. But that's often the reason that we do something like you're using something that doesn't quite do what you want, or you have a bug that prevents you from using that piece of software in a way that is useful to you. So that's kind of the traditional reason for contributing to open source. But there's a whole bunch of other reasons. I talked about localizers actually, and that's kind of a scratch your own itch too, right? We have a lot of different locales. Does one of you other Mozilla people know how many now for Firefox? It's like
82?
Yeah, well that's 82 that's shit. We have a lot more beta locales as well that don't have full string matching. But some of those locales, we have Romansk and we have Basque and things like that, little language communities where sort of the community identity is so important to people that one way for them to preserve their cultural identity is actually to contribute to open source software so that they can use it in their language and have their kids using that language. Okay, second thing is learning something new. You might say, well, I have always kind of wanted to learn to program in C++, so maybe I will contribute to PHP so that I can do that. That's a terrible way to learn C++.
Yeah, especially since it's written in C.
I'll see. Good time to through the code. Another thing is solve a different class of problems. Let's say that your day job is that you work for government, or you work in a bank, or you're working on one particular class of problems all day, financial systems or retail systems or a social network or whatever. And you think, I've always really been interested in large data set processing, right? I'd really like to work on something that involves that. So you might go and contribute to Hadoop or processing.js or something like that. These are really important ones. Build your resume. When we interview people, one of the first things I look at is whether they have open source contributions. And this is super, super critical, because when you're hiring people, what you really effort to be coders, what you really want to know is, can they code? And we all sort of hear, excuse me, if you go to Coding Horror, there's some really famous article about why Johnny can't code or whatever. And you actually get people into interviews that have obviously never written live code in their lives. Anybody not heard this kind of story? You get somebody in and you'll ask them to code FizzBuzz, and they can't do that, and then you ask them to print some text on the screen and they can't do that, and then you kind of politely ask them to leave. But there are people, they've been working for years, and somehow they've managed to get their way through and not know anything about how to write code. So somebody with open source contributions, you immediately have a record that says this person knows how to write code in language X, and you can look at the code. You can see if they're actually a decent coder or not. or make some assessments about that. And you can also learn something. Also, this is kind of like a spooky stalkery, but you can see how they behave in the community, and it tells you a lot about what kind of person they are. You might look at somebody's GitHub or whatever and say, "Wow, they've written like all these awesome projects." Then you go and look at what they did in a mailing list, and like they're always the person that's like, "No, you are wrong, and I will tell you why." Well, actually, blah blah blah. And you're like, well, maybe I don't actually want to work with this person. On the contrary, we have an intern starting in January, and when I went to look at this guy's resume, he's like a third-year college student in New Zealand, and it was like, wow, this guy has contributed to so many different projects. He's been on Stack Overflow, which is not a mailing list, but it's a way to do sort of developer contribution. He really tries to give back to other people, and he is technically really competent. So that instantly forms a really good picture, and we hire the guy. This is also useful. Let's say that you are a Java programmer and you no longer want to be a Java programmer. You're tired of working, because it's typically quite enterprisey jobs. You don't want to work at enterprising more, you want to do more startup-y stuff. And you feel like you would like to learn, say, Ruby. You can go and write some Ruby contributions. So your day jobs, your sort of employment experience doesn't say anything about, this guy knows anything about Ruby, but look at all these patches that they contributed to Rails. Right? So, this, I would argue, a really strong reason. Meeting cool people and becoming part of a community. I have had so much fun and made so many of my really good friends through both the PHP and Mozilla communities over the years. I can't say enough about this. This is really where some of my best friends are located, and they're all over the world. It's really nice. I had on Sunday this guy called Christian Wens, who some of you would know. We hadn't seen for 3 or 4 years, and he's like, "I am flying through Philly and I have a long layover, so I'm going to get in a rental car and drive for 3 hours so I can come and have lunch with you guys and talk about PHP." So we did that. It was really awesome. And make jokes about Bavaria. And finally, there's kind of the altruistic motive. I want to contribute to open source because I think that it makes the world a better place, right? I'm all about the open web and open data and open culture. But that's kind of a political statement. So, okay. So what? And what you contribute, and what you contribute to depends on your motivation and skills, right? You might want to use stuff that you already know to benefit a community, or you might want to learn something. So then the question comes, I talked about this kind of itch-scratching idea of here's this bug that has always annoyed me. It annoys me that this product that I use doesn't support X, or here's this bug that catches me every time and I'm just going to fix it. But if you're not in that situation, you're setting out and you say, well, I want to contribute something. How do you find a project to contribute to? I went up to Hacker School in June, and that's actually where I first gave this talk. So Hacker School is this, it's a free school. It's in Brooklyn. You go for 3 months, so it's over the summer this time. And basically it's like grad school, 50 people sit in a room at Etsy and write code for 3 months, any kind of code they want, any language they want. The only writer is that it has to be open source. And they do this for a few weeks, and then they get into this thing called Open Source Week, where they have to, rather than just writing a library and sticking it on GitHub, they have to contribute to an existing project. And for a lot of people it's really intimidating. And they're, because they're not in this itch-scratching mode, they're trying to find something to contribute to. And maybe you guys are in a situation too, I really want to learn Scala, so I need to find a Scala open source project to contribute to. How do I pick one? So there's a few things that are really important. First one is you need to find a project that needs a skill that you have. Don't underestimate your skills. Some of the things, so Mozilla projects need coding in lots of different languages. QA is an important one. It's a really good starting point too if you are, say, not from a technical background but would like to work in a technical occupation. Because QAs, almost without exception, don't have computer science backgrounds. It's a really good entree into the industry. You just need to have the mindset where you're good at breaking things. And a lot of people have that. Actually, I have a really good friend that works for a telco. And she ended up working in QA and testing because she reported so many bugs. She was always filing bugs for IT, filing bugs for IT, filing bugs for IT, and then they called and said, "Do you just want to come work here? Because we need you." Localization. Documentation writing is an underestimated skill. You will often find, actually, when you go to contribute to a project, the documentation sucks. That's a really good starting point to start contributing. As you are checking out some code and installing it, and you find that the documentation is wrong, because invariably it's wrong, right? Who has not had this experience? Almost nobody. So just fix that, and you already helped the person after you. Answering questions on mailing lists, all this kind of stuff. you should try and pick a project that is friendly to new contributors. And you can gauge that by looking at the community, looking at the mailing list, news group, forums, whatever it is. Some open source communities are extraordinarily friendly to new contributors. Some are really not. I met this woman and she had a bunch of patches for Git. Git is a project that is extraordinarily difficult to contribute to because it's really like a very closed circle. It's hard to penetrate. She kept putting up these patches and they just kept rejecting them with no feedback. She was like... So, sort of as a point of frustration, actually, she kind of barged her way. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this approach, but it made me laugh. Like, she got all the Git documentation, she rewrote entirely to be grammatically correct with correct spelling. And that was a pretty damn big pull request. They accepted that and then they decided she was okay. Like, she kind of like proven herself by going through this really painful Alright, Padawan learning, you've suffered enough. So here's the thing too. You also want something that has an issue tracker. Yep.
I was just going to say, back on the friendly to new contributors, I was going to make a comment that on the PHP Women page, there's a PHP Women Partner Program that projects have kind of identified themselves as, hey, we're really open, this is kind of what we're looking for.
Cool.
So if it's men and women, it doesn't matter. Like, that's just like, those are going to be kind of identified friendly projects to new people. So if you go to phpwomen.org, there's a link that says partners. That's on there. So.
And actually, one of the ways in general, if a project has a page that talks about how to get started contributing, that's a good sign. If that page is missing, that's kind of a signal for the universe. And if you're really passionate about the project, you shouldn't let it stop you, but just be aware that it might be a little harder. And it might just be that they haven't had time to write it yet, too. So. Some projects don't have an issue tracker. I was actually kind of astounded to discover this. Like, really? Postgres does not have an issue tracker.
What is wrong with that?
They have a mailing list. If you want something to be implemented, you ask on the mailing list. And if you want to find a bug to fix, you are supposed to read the archives of the mailing list, just like page through it until you find something to fix. What? I'm deadly serious. And this is like a enterprise-grade database system. And that's a really closed community. There are a couple of people in the core group that are good about reaching out to people, and they're actually pretty friendly once you get to know them. I think it's because like it's every community has different character, right? So I think the PHP community is very pragmatic, right? Like it's very done. It's all about getting things done. The Python community is a little bit more academic. They want things to be like elegant, like the Zen of Python. The fact that there is a Zen of Python tells you something about the Python community. It's a really beardy community. Come to a PHP community, I see lots of women and lots of guys without beards. I go to a Python conference, it's just beards. And not the little ones with the long beards. And you instantly know that you're at a different conference. And so I start to play this game, right, like at OSCON where they have all these different tracks. If you can stick your head into a room and try and guess what the topic of the talk is going to be about without looking at the slides, you can do this. So there is like a character of the community. And that Postgres not having an issue tracker is strongly related to the character of the Postgres community because it's a very close-knit group of people, all of whom have like an academic background in databases. Actually, I'll tell you a very small anecdote which sums this up. One of the very first PHP conferences I went to was PHPCon West 2002. It was in San Jose. It was a really like a kind of a slightly ghetto conference, but it was really a lot of fun. It was run by Linux Magazine back in those days. And they had booths at sort of the drinks party for different open source projects. And there was a MySQL table here and a Postgres table over here. And I know all the people now that were sitting at those tables. I didn't know them then. The MySQL table, she was going to laugh at me now. They had like shots lined up along the front of the table, so that if you're coming over to talk to them, you can drink with them. Because they're all like Finnish and Swedish, and that's how you bond.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of guys behind the table. They're all blonde. They're all drunk. They're all like laughing and talking in Swedish. And at the Postgres table, there were three guys. They all had beards down to their waists. And they all had their laptops, and they were coding, not talking to anybody, coding. And then occasionally they would sit up and give dirty looks to the people at the MySQL table. And that right there is probably everything you need to know about those two communities. Anyway,
that we'll take that just as a clip and a soundbite for
yeah, I'm happy
for the MySQL community. We'll just
yeah, and I think it was like David Axmark,
yeah, David
and Monty,
and Monty, yeah.
And
they're very good about sharing their liquor.
Yeah. So it's actually pretty funny. All right, so find a project that has an issue tracker, and then there's like a level above having an issue tracker, which is a lot of projects will mark good first bugs. I know, like the Subversion project does this. I think anybody just wants to contribute to Subversion, but they did a really good job of this. One of the first projects I think that did a very good job of this. We used to do that at Mozilla, and now we've actually moved to a different model of having what we call mentored bugs. So instead of saying good first bug on the bug, it actually says mentor equals email address. So you can actually go through and get a list of mentored bugs. And not only is it like something that people think would be easier to do, but also there's a person that is designated for you to talk to about it. Usually it's because it's a bug that they have, and they think this is pretty straightforward. This would be a good bug for a new contributor. So but it's not super urgent time-wise. There's usually definitely criteria for those. And I'm really happy with this as a starting point, because it's like if you have a particular person you can reach out to, it's much less intimidating than sort of like a big faceless open source project. Another thing I think is important is it's easier to get started contributing if they have a clear process to accept patches from new contributors, and that's documented somewhere. Because we'll talk about sort of the process in a little bit. But if you don't know how to get your patch accepted, then writing it may be a waste of your time. I'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay. So, how can you get to know an open source project? So when you're entering an open source community, it's like entering any new social group, going to a new high school, starting at college, joining a club. You are joining a cultural group that has its own set of social norms. One thing that's really important to do is to try and understand what those social norms are a little bit before you just like leap into the community. So watch and observe. Read the mailing list, read the news groups, hang out in IRC. Some projects will have an IRC channel specifically for newbies. We have one that's called Introduction on the Mozilla web server. It is like the designated place to ask dumb questions. That's the purpose of it. And the people that go there are people who are nice and happy to answer those questions. Read the bug tracker and the kind of interactions you see there. The user groups, or go to a user group, go to a conference if you can. And you'll get a feel for how the community operates. So let's say I want to build some new feature into PHP or Firefox or whatever. What would be my social path for getting that feature accepted? Right, not just the technical part, but how would I socialize it? And in some projects, it's as simple as like putting up a patch. Like, hey, I added support for amazing, complicated thing, blah, to this language, right? I added full Unicode support to PHP, or I added... See, this is an example where it doesn't work. This is what I'm going to get to. And there are some projects where that's never going to work. Like, you actually have to, like, do a lot of social engineering in order to get your patch accepted. When you're first getting started, I don't recommend those kinds of projects or patches, right? Like, start with something, and you tend to build your credibility over time, right? Like, there's a reputation, karma, and trust issue. If you fix lots of crappy little bugs that nobody else wants to fix, you build karma, and people start to say, hey, that Jill, she's a really cool woman. She fixed all these bugs that have been hanging around for ages and nobody wanted to fix them, and now she wants to work on this harder project, so maybe we'll trust her to do it. And trust is often unstated, but it's things like, someone said to me in IRC, actually, so in conversation with Corey, and I said, blah, blah, do this, and Corey said, fine. He said to me, I just said that to him 10 minutes ago, and he went, no, whatever. And I was like, it's a trust thing, because he knows that you don't know anything about this, so he's not going to agree to it. So trust is really important in like getting stuff done both at work and in an open source project, right? So, read the code. I have a reference to that later in the slides. Understand what the review process is. Like, if you submit a patch, what will happen to it? Is it the kind of project where you need to go on a mailing list and say, hey, I put up a patch on bug, blah, blah, blah. Would somebody be able to take a look? Is it the kind of project where before you do that you should write a blog post saying, I think this is how we should add blah blah support to blah blah project? All those kind of things kind of come later in the process. I think when you're first getting started you don't want to do anything that involves writing a blog post or a huge amount of socialization. But later there's definitely some social skills getting this done. And people get frustrated, right? Because even among the geek community there's a huge range of social skills. And some people are really technically skilled and will build like some amazing technology, but they can't get it landed in a project. Usually, often because they haven't understood the social norms or because they're really abrasive, and people don't want to accept their patch, even though it's technically good, because it's like, I don't want to have to deal with him, because he's trouble. It's sort of, can't emphasize enough that the social part is really important. Okay, and the other thing that you can do when you're trying to get to know a project is to make connections with mentors, like get to know who the friendly people are who you can ask a question to. And those are usually good people to get to know anyway. Okay. So, I want to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. It's mentioned twice at this conference already, which is really interesting. So here are these thoughts. Everybody, and I think if you've thought this in the last 2 days, everybody else in this room has contributed more to open source than I have. They're all better coders than me. They know what they're doing. They think that I know what I'm doing, but I really don't. And sooner or later, I'm going to say something stupid and people will realise that I don't actually know as much as they think they do. Another one that I see, I have like a guy on my team that's like a human machine. I can't believe how much stuff he produces. You know, you have like those people like the 10x coder, right? He's one of those guys. And whenever I have a one-to-one with him, he says, I should be doing more. I just feel like I'm not doing enough. I'm like, it's called imposter syndrome. You're doing fine. That's really common, like, oh, I'm only fixing easy bugs, but, you know, I should be working on something harder. I wish I could do more for that project. You know, the documentation's in a really bad state and it's all my fault. That's kind of like, I don't really feel So there are actually studies that show there's a correlation between imposter syndrome and intelligence, because it's this Dunning-Kruger effect thing, right? If you're incompetent, you don't know that you're incompetent, usually. You think you're awesome. And the more that you think that you suck, chances are either you're not too bad at it or you're certainly on the path to getting better at it anyway. Like, being conscious that you suck is the first step to getting better. The trick is just like to realise that you are getting better and it's gradual, and that you can never underestimate the power of gradual improvement, right? Just keep coding and you will get better. And at some point 10 years down the track, when you're saying these things to yourself, which I say to myself on a regular basis, I was thinking some of these things this morning, and say, well, apparently I'm really good at fooling people. Okay, so I think the trick is like, it's just like kind of a cognitive behavioural therapy thing. When you catch yourself thinking these thoughts, think, there's that imposter syndrome going again, you've got a label for it now, and you can say, well, I know it's like a flaw in my thinking, and I'm just going to move on. I put it aside and say, that part of my brain is broken, let me just go and do some work instead. Ed?
This kind of ties into a little bit of what Jennifer talked about yesterday. Yeah. And the thing that I wonder about is, how do you tell the difference between I'm just suffering from imposter syndrome and no, I really don't know what the hell I'm talking about?
That's fair. That's a really good question. And I think that there are some objective measures of that.
Right.
At the beginning, I think it's okay to say, so I have imposter syndrome because I'm contributing to a new project. I have started working on this Ruby project, and I know that I don't know anything, right? If you still feel, and that's okay to feel that way at the beginning. And, you know, it's a good, you say, well, I don't know anything, I'll open my mind and learn as much as I can. If you still feel that way in 12 months, then you've got to look at sort of some objective measures. Say, how much code have I written? Is it good quality code? Have other people looked at it? Have they said that it's good? Did I get some good feedback on a blog post that I wrote about this? Did my patches get landed? All these kinds of things. Like, and I think it's really important to like look at those objective criteria of, am I actually doing a good job or not? And if you find that none of those things are true, then go and seek out feedback, because it's a really good way to improve anyway, right? Try and find a mentor, write a blog post, put up a patch, because the more objective things you can look at, the easier it is to like strike down these negative internal thoughts and say, it's just my brain. I have objective proof that I'm doing a good job. That'd be my advice. That's a very like left brain engineered piece of advice, by the way. Like, look at it objectively, measure some stuff, and remind yourself. I think, yeah, that's really my only advice. That, you know, I have this all the time. It's never going to go away. I think it's impossible to get rid of. But there is like some chart that shows like imposter syndrome is like strongly correlated with IQ. The smarter you are, the more you feel this way. Which, as I said, you know, it's that thing like, what was it, like 77% of Americans think that they are above average drivers. And the other 23% think that they suck, and are probably the ones that are driving like at the speed limit and really say, I'm not a good driver, so I can't drive fast. I'm assuming anyway. This is all like a very long bow that I'm drawing. Any other questions about that? So I think the other thing about this is like, you're not alone. Probably, is there anyone in this room that has never felt this way? And if they had never felt this way, they'd be me, because they would have like no lack of confidence about saying that. So everybody here feels like this. It's just normal. You just have to move on. Okay. So you have beaten your imposter syndrome with a stick. You have found a project that looks friendly and has good mentored bugs and good documentation and blah, blah, blah. So what do you do? Check out the code, build it, install it. This can take a really long time for a lot of projects. And often this is where people get like put off. So I think the most important thing here is, if this is hard, it's worth working through it. because like one of the biggest gifts you can give to an open source project is improving that. Right? If you make it easier for the contributors that come behind you, that's about as valuable a thing as you can do. Whether it's improving the documentation, automating the steps that you had to take, you know, doing some packaging, anything like that. Any of those kinds of things are really, really helpful to people. One of the guys on my team has now, what he does when he gets to this is that whenever he installs something, he sets up a Vagrant for it, and then he donates the Vagrant scripts to the open source project. He does for EtherCAD Lite, and they were like, wow, this is amazing, because that's incredibly difficult to install. Find a bug. So looking for good first bugs, mentored bugs, etc. Code reading. I thought I had a link. Maybe it's further down. Is actually a skill, and I'll talk about that a little bit further. Then you're going to make and test a patch for this bug that you found. Some projects will require you to sign a contributor agreement. One thing I didn't talk about was kind of licensing and contributor agreements and so on. One of the things that I should probably have said earlier is look at all the licensing it is for the project you want to contribute to and make sure it's something that you personally are kind of sort of ethically comfortable with. Some projects will ask you to sign some kind of contributor agreement. We do. It basically, usually it's like a copyright assignment type clause, or a thing that says I retain my copyright but I license project blah, give them an exclusive, non-exclusive worldwide royalty-free license to use blah blah blah. Find out what it is, because if you need to do this and you haven't, nobody's going to take a patch. A lot of projects will have some kind of code review, and that will either be like putting a patch on a bug, or sending a patch to a mailing list, or putting in a pull request, and somebody will actually look at your code and see if it's good or not. Then comes the part you don't expect, like you've written this code, you put it through, you think, yes, I'm done. And then your patch languishes for 12 months. And finally somebody reviews it and says this code has been rotted arm-minus. So there's kind of a step in here. And ideally you would have been doing some of this beforehand. You have a mentor, or you've been talking to people on the project, so they're kind of expecting this patch to come. But there will be like a, hey Elizabeth, could you look at that patch that I put up? Like grab somebody and and make it their job. It's like this thing of like, if you shout help, no one will come, but if you say help, then you feel like you have to, right? So waiting, socializing, and ideally, then the patch lands and you are now a contributor. Yay! Level up! We're talking about this on Friday. We have like this open badges system that we're building. And we have all these like little badges for like, landed a patch, landed 5 patches, landed 10 patches, awesome, open source contributor, etc. So they're kind of cool. Alright, so a little bit more detail getting set up. This is really hard. I feel like I actually got ahead of myself and talked about this. The main thing with all of this is sometimes really you get everything installed and get all your dependency held stuff managed, and then you don't have any test data, so you can't reproduce the bug. I talked about this a little bit in my talk yesterday, but getting a test database or like a usable test data set is really hard for a lot of open source projects. This is where if you are not scratching your own itch, it can be really hard to do that. But just like be annoying, persevere, like nag people until they give you data. Alright, I think I talked about all that, so I'll move on. Okay, code reading. You have sat down to contribute to a new project and there are 500,000 lines of code in perhaps a language that you're not that familiar with yet. It has its own conventions, it's a project that's been going for 10 or 15 years. There's like some abominable legacy codes like the Here Be Dragons parts of the code. So you might have a bug, and typically a good first bug would be like 1 line of code, and the whole point of that bug is figuring out where that 1 line of code is, really. There's this old joke about knowing where to tap. Does anyone not know this joke? Alright, you don't know.
I don't know the joke.
Alright, it's really short. In a big factory, a machine breaks, and the factory owner calls an engineer, and she comes in, looks at the machine, walks over to like some little service panel, opens it, takes out a hammer, goes tap tap, and the machine comes to life. And the factory is like, wow, thanks, that was amazing. And then the bill comes and it says, fix machine, $10,000. He's like, oh my god, send me an itemized bill. And the itemized bill comes and it says, tap widget with hammer, $1. $9,999, knowing where to tap. So that's, it's true with code, right? Like a lot of the time it's like working out what is broken and where that piece of code is in order to fix it. So your job as a new contributor is to try to understand that. You can look at the layout of the code. Documentation can help you, but sometimes not. If code is written with some kind of common framework, like let's say you're looking at a web app that's written in Django or Cake PHP or some kind of micro framework, which is always easier. I have an idea what the layout of the code is. If not, hopefully someone thought of it and it's like reasonably well laid out. Look for some kind of main event loop or controller, right? And find your bug. It's not simple, it might take you days. But there's a book that I really, really like. It's not, like, most people haven't read this, and I love this book. It's called Code Reading the Open Source Perspective by Spinelli's, and it's actually about understanding the BSD code base. So here's examples, like if you were going to fix a bug in BSD, where would you start? What would you look at? And these are what the libraries do, and this is how you would understand them. It's like 400 pages. So this is a non-trivial skill, but that book is also a really good way to level up. I totally recommend it to you. Here's another one out on open source code quality, which is also a fantastic read. So I really recommend that as a starting point. Okay, when you are writing your patch, you need to follow the project's coding standard. Otherwise, people will like reject your patch for stupid reasons, like you got the indenting wrong. This is the easiest thing. The thing that is tricky is some projects will have a formal written coding standard and some don't. And you will discover it by like socialization and trial and error. Here's my patch, you did this wrong. Where is that written down? It's not. We're guilty of this. Yeah, right. Yeah, so your job is to write it down. Although that can actually be really hard, like documenting a coding standard, because then it provokes the argument. Even though this is what we do, writing it down then will make people fight about it on like a mailing list for a year. We're guilty of this. I discovered this because we're having this conversation in Mozilla Web. They were like, we don't have a JavaScript coding standard. That's really evil. We have all these coding standards like Python and PHP, even like Perl is a coding standard, but we don't have one for JavaScript. So we go to the Firefox team because the whole front end of Firefox is written in JavaScript. So do you guys have a coding standard? There's like these 6 bullet points here. Is that what you wanted? You guys don't have a coding standard? But everybody writes JavaScript the same way. There is one, but it's implicit, right? It's not written down. So this is really important. Okay, so some gotchas when you're looking for something to solve. There's kind of 3 classes of problems that I think you should avoid trying to fix an open source project. One of them is the end of rainbow problem. And PHP for a long time, this was a JIT, right? Every 6 months, somebody would come on mailing list and say, I think we should build a PHP JIT. And it's like, oh God, this again. God, I can't stand to read the arguments. All the same people will say all the same things, or those people will have left and some new people will say the same things. So this is why you need to read the mailing list, so you cannot propose doing one of those things.
Again.
Yeah, again. And if you really have a good solution, go away and build it and use it in your company, and then maybe people will adopt it. And that's kind of like the guerrilla way to solve one of those end of rainbow problems. Unwanted features.
Yeah, that one too.
I built, GIF animation support for GIMP or whatever, right? Like people like, just this kind of stuff that people don't want. Nobody cares about it, and it might be like a plugin that you want in your personal installation of Open Source Project X. But you should think about it. Like if you're adding features, a lot of open source projects have some kind of pluggable architecture. What you need to say is, I will write this as a plugin or an add-on, and if it's useful, then it will make its way into the main project. Intractable bugs. You see a bug, it has been open for 10 years. It doesn't look very hard, but there's a reason it's been open for 10 years. Some of them have been open for 10 years because it's just not that interesting. Some of them have been open for 10 years because nobody knows how to do it. So, more power to you if you can solve it. But probably not a good first bug. Right? Trolls. So, like every workplace, everyone that has worked anywhere knows that every workplace has a troll, and every open source project has a troll. Sorry?
Or 10.
Or 10. The troll ratio is highly project variable. So also try and pick a project that has a low troll ratio. And there's some people that, the thing I think that's tricky about trolls, does everybody know what a troll, does anyone not know what a troll is? We don't feed them. The trick is that some trolls are just people who hang out in IRC, obnoxious and never contribute anything. The worst trolls are the ones that are very senior in the project, right? And because they're the ones that have power. If you go to contribute something to like famous, I'm not going to name names, but I am thinking of a specific example, famous open source project X, and you get tangled with famous open source contributor Y, and they tell you that you're stupid, you might walk away and never contribute again. So just like, don't go there, stay away. Like if you know that person X is a troll, just don't interact with them. Wave and say, hi, have a nice day, and walk the other way, because they'll probably get grumpy about that as well. And finally, like, don't be the troll. Sometimes when people, it's this tribal thing. I want to be part of the tribe, and I'm new to the tribe, so I'm going to be more part of the tribe than everybody else. Like, we don't do things that way here, because you've been working on the open source project for a week, and you want to like smack down everybody else that came behind you and enforce like the correct way of doing things. It's really common. Don't be that person when you're new, and don't be that person when you've been there for 10 years either. But just don't be a troll. Yes.
And if you have a problem with this in your project, there is a great presentation out there. If you Google for poisonous people,
is that the
it's
Fitz and
Ben
Sussman one?
Collins and,
yeah. Yes, that's a great project. And you can actually engage with those guys. They have both worked on Subversion for a really long time, which has its fair share of trolls. So did everyone hear what Corey said? Dealing with poisonous people?
Yeah, dealing with poisonous people. So if you Google poisonous people, you'll find their...
Yeah, I'm about to tweet the YouTube link.
Thank you, that's great.
I will also be giving a talk today on dealing with difficult people. So
yes, please come to that. I'm actually really looking forward to it. And there's actually a recommended book here that I read after dealing with a bunch of difficult people, which is Snakes in Suits, Dealing with Sociopaths in the Workplace. But it will also help you deal with trolls really well. Same thing, like you just kind of have to recognise that stuff. Okay, so things that you should do. Blog. Blog about how you got started with Community X, blog about the bugs you fixed. If the project you're working on has some kind of Planet or blog aggregator, get your blog on there. It will help you find a job later. Become involved in the community, because it's a little bit of a like you only get out as much as you put in, right? But you will make friends, and getting involved in an open source community is like the best way to find a job that I am aware of, right? If you are a passionate contributor to something, you will never have to look for a job again because the jobs can come to you. I think it's really important to know. Another thing you should do is once you know what you're doing, help somebody else, right? Like find that other new contributor that's like, I really want to fix this bug that's been open for 10 years and it doesn't look that hard. No, stay away, do this one instead. Right? You can do stuff like that. Make friends, learn stuff, make the world a better place, and win. And no, anyone that contributes, thank you. Because we wouldn't do this without contributors.
I actually have one thing that kind of relates to it was the Jennifer's talk from yesterday too, is that when you do blog or whatever and you're worried about something, well, first of all, obviously research your topics and stuff, but very, very early on, I think if you go to like shiri.com, like node/13 or something like that, I had this whole blog post about how I thought enum was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it was awesome, and everyone should use it, and blah, blah, blah. And this was back in the day before you could add a field to the end of enum in an online way. So everybody, like, you know, who was more experienced in the MySQL community immediately wrote back and was like, actually, that's not so great. It's not a great idea, because if you ever have, you know, if you have yes or no, that's great, but what happens when you need maybe or didn't answer or whatever? You know, then you have to take the whole table offline to, you know, add that column, because that's how it used to be. And so my next post was like, wow, thanks, you know, for all the, you know, good advice, and then, you know, I didn't understand the full issue, whatever. And then, you know, I was like, oh man, I'm never going to be, nobody's ever going to take my, you know, anything I say seriously ever again, because basically one of my first very public, you know, posts on this aggregation feed was, you know, showing my ignorance. And that's not the case. You know, I eventually, you know, I researched and posted enough stuff. And, you know, to this day, some, you know, people still disagree on different technical points. But, you know, to Jennifer's thing about risk-taking yesterday, like, definitely don't be afraid to take that risk. Don't be afraid to ask a question in a blog post. I know people who, you know, will say, I ran across this problem, here's this whole detailed thing, I've made a bug about it, what do you think? You know, I think it should be like this, what do you think? That happens a lot too, so I think it's really, you know, we do definitely think of blogs as a kind of a one-way street, right? We're talking to our audience, but I think especially when you're a beginner too, people are really willing to help you out. And that's a nice way of saying it. I think a lot of people are willing to correct your mistakes.
Correct you when you're wrong.
But
actually, and on that, when you do blog, like, use comment moderation and don't feed the trolls, because I think in a lot of open source projects, you know, there's like religious wars, right? PHP sucks. Why would anyone use it? Only people who don't know how to program would code in PHP. Or I just use Chrome. Blah blah blah. This bug in Firefox hasn't been fixed in 10 years. There's actually like a sometimes wherever you expose yourself, right? If you're involved in an open source project, people are going to be annoying. Somebody has like bought advertising on Facebook. Do you guys see this?
I
To promote the bug they want to get fixed. So every time I log into Facebook and the right hand thing, it says, Mozilla developers, did you know bug number blah 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 has been unfixed for 8 years? And I'm like, I'm just trying to like see what my sister in Australia did on the weekend. I'm actually trying really hard not to think about Mozilla right now because I'm on Facebook. Anyway,
You need to buy a response.
Pull request or
but yeah, and you will get like stupid comments because people are stupid. So you know, moderate them or just don't care. Like, don't let them get to you because there's all kinds of trolls on the internet. I was going to say, so everybody has contributed, and those of you that are going to contribute in the future, you know, none of the stuff would exist without contributors, right? Like, it's a democracy. There is not like a core group of people that write all the open source code in the world. The people that write open source code are sitting in this room. It's all of us. So it's really like an actionable thing that you can do to make the world better by making stuff. So do it. It's awesome. And thank you for your contributions. Questions? Yes, Ed.
I guess one thing I'm wondering about is finding the balance between your day job stuff and contributing. And maybe it's a little easier when you don't have anybody relying on you, like little people, and, families and stuff. And you know, so I find that, especially since I'm working in although a relatively understanding startup. Still a startup, and a lot of times I'm just fatigued and just am not excited about working on anybody else's stuff, but I still feel kind of like I want to. It's so I'm wondering about how to find that balance and find the time and the right projects to
That's a great question, and I really like it because I'm in the same boat as you, right? I think I'm an engineering manager and I have a 3-year-old and a farm. So time is like my scarce resource on that triangle, which I had yesterday. So I think there's a couple of things here. First of all, you have to recognize that at different times in your life, you're going to have more and less to contribute. And that's not just true for open source, right? It's true for like volunteering to be on a community board or, you know, whatever it is, like volunteering at your kid's school, whatever it is. Sometimes in your life you have more time than others. Especially when your kids are young, I think you have to forgive yourself. You have to be really good. I'm really bad at this. You have to be really good at forgiving yourself. Like, and this is imposter syndrome too. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough open source, and I'm probably not playing with my kid enough, and you know, all of that stuff, right? Like, it's just imposter syndrome, but yeah. And guilt, because guilt is awesome. Forgive yourself, be easy on yourself. That's the first thing. The second thing is, one thing that has worked really well for me, I actually blogged about this, the blog post is called the 15-Minute Maker's Schedule, which basically says what you need to be doing if you want to contribute is when you're doing something that doesn't consume a lot of brain power, like driving the car or cleaning, say you have a long commute, cleaning the house, or something boring, showering is a great one. Something that doesn't actually consume your brain cells except for like the tiny little bit that like moves the steering wheel and doesn't crash into semi-trailers. But you should be thinking about what you're going to contribute. Like plan the code in your head. So when you get a chance to sit down, you can spend that 15 minutes just like blurting it out into the computer, right? And this is like the most useful skill that I've found. I actually learned it from an author because she had 6 kids and wrote 10 books in a year, and I was like, how did you do this? She's like, oh, I just do everything in 15-minute increments. If it gets really bad, I go lock myself in the bathroom and tell the kids I'm going to the bathroom with my laptop. I commend this to you. And I think, yeah, totally. It's the one place like nobody will question you.
Yes.
You know, just try not to get water in your laptop. Because I know you already did. Or anything else. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, you know, just like forgive yourself. Take some little bits of time away. Like you come here, send you to a conference. Conferences are awesome because you have like flying time usually. Not this one for you, but like, oh my god, 5 hours on a plane when nobody is asking you to do anything. It's amazing. People are like, I hate flying. I'm like, no, I love it. Yeah. No one will talk to me. No one will be like, mama, mama, mama. I see like, ding, 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 ding. Oh, I think actually the worst thing about like becoming an engineering manager is that it does the same thing, right? It chips away at your thing, because there are so many people that want to ask you stuff that it's rare to get like more than 10 or 15 minutes where you're not interrupted. It's kind of hell for coding anything complicated. And the other thing that I do is try not to bite off more than I can chew. It's true with open source project development day stuff. Like, don't pick stuff that's on the critical path. don't pick anything that requires like really deep thought. Like now is not the time to implement a new machine learning algorithm. But anything that can be done like where you can be really productive in short bursts.
Hey, if people in this room, you are all talented enough to take 10 minutes a day.
Yeah.
I will hook you up. Go through the notes in the PHP document.
Yes, that's a really good one.
Give us 5 minutes a day to work.
Yep.
People would love you for it.
Answer one question on Stack Overflow, right?
Yeah.
Answer one question on mailing list. That's a valuable use of 10 minutes. That's awesome.
Yes, search for probably #PHP on Twitter and find 1,000 questions and answer just one of them.
Yep, exactly. That's my advice. Does that kind of answer your question? I know I rambled for like 10 minutes.
That's really useful, yeah.
I feel
The
really
other thing
strongly
is,
about
if you work for any sort of services company, whether it's consulting or just doing things, for other people or something, you can actually work that into like, hey, Friday mornings or Friday at noon or Friday at 3 p.m. I'm going to spend 30 minutes doing that, and they're going to think you're awesome.
Yeah.
Because you're doing it from, the engine yard account. You're going to help people, on their PHP questions. Like that now becomes a business thing. So now you can kind of sneak it in. Part of it is how do you make it as a work thing, as opposed to how do you find the time to do this thing you want to do. How do you make it so you can do it during work?
Check your employment contract first.
Yes, I think that's really good advice, right? As open source developers, you have to be conscious of like intellectual property laws and all the contracts that you sign. When you sign up for a new job, don't sign a contract that says they own everything that you think. Like, if Google, yeah. So if that's not negotiable, I won't go and work there because like I have IP that is separate from open source IP and book IP that is separate from my day job, and I'm not giving that to somebody. It's my brain, and I'm not selling it to slavery. So I can't say that strongly enough. Question? Any other questions? Thank you.
Just something to add about trolls. Gen2 was one of the great examples where we didn't act fast enough to remove someone who was such a big negative influence on the community. And that really pulled a lot of people and a lot of contributors and a lot of other developers down.
Yep.
Yeah.
And by the
Windows syndrome.
because we were like, this is voluntary, everyone's giving their time.
Right.
This guy is pretty awesome at what he does, but he's also a complete split to everyone else.
Right.
And how are you
I thought it was
actually
gonna
going to
run
judge that and take the guy out? But in the end, we should have done that like 2 years before when we actually acted on it and said, you know what, we're pulling away your access. You're not welcome here anymore because you're too much of a pain.
That's
Deal
interesting.
with it.
And it's, I would attribute a lot of where Gen2 is today versus where it could be today to
A lot of that,
a couple of key guys that were just roles.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's true.
There's
in
so
every
much
open source
negativity
community.
that completely pulled everything down.
I'm going to tie things up because I am over time. So thank you all for listening.